What does AFK actually mean in OSRS? It stands for away from keyboard, but if you take this literally, you aren't going to have much success. Try getting up from your computer and walking away at the motherlode mine or during a cannon task and see how that goes. Commonly, skilling methods in OSRS will be sorted and ranked in a few ways, in order of XP per hour and AFK ability. In this case, AFK ability refers to how long you can go without clicking and not have your character go idle. Whether or not you need to actively be looking at your screen is also a factor. Skilling methods like Barbarian Fishing or Arceus Bloods are described as AFK. However, this doesn't mean you can literally be away from your keyboard. The mining section of Arceus Bloods provides about a minute of AFK time, and you can get to the altar with not too many clicks, but you still have to pay attention to where your character is at in this process and when you need to click, or you'll be idle more often than not. And with Barb Fishing, you can click the fishing spot and go AFK, but there's no guarantee how long the fishing spot will actually last, and even then you need to drop your inventory every now and again, which requires spam clicking fish, not very AFK. Some activities are completely brain dead, such as pickpocketing the Artie Knight. You can just spam click without looking at the screen most of the time, but the keyword is click. Therefore, this may require zero attention, and you may not need to actually look at the screen, but you still have to click, which means you can't actually be AFK. I would consider these skilling methods low intensity as compared to stuff like combo runes or 3-tick fishing, and this is what AFK seems to mean these days. But then there's the issue of how you define low intensity and what the risks are. For instance, some Slayer tasks like Bloodvelds or Hellhounds in the Catacombs are fairly AFK. However, if you leave long enough to run out of prayer, then you'll die, and I'd consider dying pretty intense. Then you have bosses that aren't as hard as other bosses, but are still bosses. These would be mid-level ones like Zulrah or Vorkath. You have people saying that these things are practically AFK. It's hard to tell if it's just them trying to brag about how good they are, or if they're completely out of touch with reality. Probably both. It's true that these bosses can become very chill with a lot of practice, but AFK, no. You probably couldn't survive either of these bosses for more than 10 seconds while looking away from your screen completely. So with that being said, what can you do that literally is AFK? Methods of training combat such as sand crabs or splashing are your best bet if you want to walk away from your computer for minutes at a time. These will only require you to click a few times every 15 minutes, whether it's to reset aggro or just avoid the logout timer. In terms of skilling, there are low XP mining methods such as Shooting Stars or Guardians of the Rift mining, which both offer multiple minutes of AFK time reliably. Woodcutting gives you redwoods at level 90 and magics at 75, which are also nice options and usually good for at least a few minutes per click. With fishing, you have Curumbuins with the fishing barrel, and you have anglers or lava eels, which will give you a lot of AFK time just due to how slowly you catch them. Other than these, most skills don't have a solid literal AFK option. Now, even though Jagex has obviously implemented plenty of AFK methods into the game on purpose, they have a complicated relationship with the AFK ability that they want to allow in skilling. In RuneScape Classic, every time you wanted to attempt to catch a fish, you'd have to click. However, if your inventory was full, you could continue to catch fish, which would now be dropped onto the ground. This was a trade-off, but I'd bet the way we have it now is a lot less click intensive. This was also how woodcutting worked. In today's game, if you compare something like woodcutting or fishing to something like mining iron, it's pretty clear which the community prefers, and so most changes that have made the game more AFK have been well received overall. In addition, another annoying thing is that you couldn't even drop things while walking back then, and if you had to rearrange your inventory, it would cancel the action you were currently doing, meaning if you were rearranging your inventory during a fight, you would stop fighting and have to re-click the monster. Quality of life has moved this game towards more AFK time while training. However, some training methods that players have discovered have been too AFK for Jagex's liking. Because of this, they've been nerfed or removed. The biggest example I can think of is when Nightmare Zone came out, you could camp there in Guthans for 6 hours. This being back in the days when the idle timer wouldn't log you out if you were in combat. Personally, I did not play OSRS back then, but I would assume the reason they got rid of this is that Jagex viewed it as basically equivalent to botting, and they made it clear that they did not want this to be the kind of game where you could get up and walk away for 6 hours and then come back and still be training. I have from time to time heard players fondly reminisce about these days, so clearly some players were a fan of doing this, but it did seem a little exploitative. More recently there was Duke mining, and it was removed as well, despite the fact that it was only about 10k an hour to AFK there. For those that are unfamiliar, the Duke Succulus boss that released with Desert Treasure 2 has a short phase where you have to mine stuff and use it to make a potion and awaken the boss. However, the stuff that you mine is stackable, so you could literally just stand there and AFK mine, similar to Guardians of the Rift mining. The difference with this method, however, is that the action wasn't broken every 10 minutes or so like it is in Guardians due to the game ending. This meant that one click could send you mining indefinitely, and if you put a paperweight on your spacebar, you could keep mining overnight, as you wouldn't get logged off until you hit the 6-hour timer. This was a risky maneuver, but unlikely to actually get you banned, as you wouldn't be using a bot client that's detectable by Jagex to do this. Players were upset that this was removed because mining is a universally hated skill among most players. Shortly after this, shooting stars were reworked, which calmed some players down. This did bring an interesting topic to the forefront, however, and this is that skills that have a combination of extremely low XP rates as well as inability to AFK are the most commonly hated. In addition to mining, the other two that usually come to mind are runecraft and agility. Runecraft has seen many improvements since the release of OSRS. As mentioned before, Arceus Bloods is fairly low intensity and has been out for a number of years now. However, you need to be 77 runecraft to do this method, and getting to 77 was an absolute nightmare before Guardians of the Rift. You were stuck either doing combo runes, abyss runecrafting, or doing ZMI. Some people will tell you that ZMI is AFK, but I personally find this to be an extremely unenjoyable activity, and the proof was in the pudding. If you looked at any mid-level player's skills on the high scores back before Guardians of the Rift, 9 out of 10 times runecraft was their lowest skill. A lot of times it still is. Guardians of the Rift was released last year, and it's widely accepted that they did a good job with this minigame. The XP isn't great, but it also isn't very click intensive. Agility is hated for a similar reason. There's no way to get over 100k agility XP an hour, and realistically with rooftops you'd be lucky to get half of that until Prif or Artie. Hallowed Sepulchre is the best XP in the game in terms of agility, and many players will argue that it's great content and makes agility bearable. However, it is intimidating to learn, as it is probably the hardest piece of skilling content in the game. Neither of these activities are AFK at all, and they are really the only viable training methods for this skill. We've also run into problems with players that have achieved a high level of a certain skill before newer and less miserable methods were released. Many of these people don't want to see their achievement of suffering through these grinds be devalued, and for this reason they oppose new training methods to a variety of skills. It might seem like this is just nerds whining and being spiteful, but they do have some credibility with this. For instance, when RuneSpan was released back in RS2, runecraft became a fairly easy 99 to get. It was more AFK than anything that exists in OSRS to this day, and offered better XP rates too. This made it so there was no reason to ever do any other training method. This was considered too massive a change for the skill, and was very widely looked at as a bad update, and not a mistake that OSRS would want to repeat. This is why, with the release of Guardians of the Rift, they were careful to make the XP fairly low so that there would still be a reason to do the other methods if you were willing to click a whole lot more. Generally, the more intense training methods give more XP, but Jagex has been adding low-intensity, low-XP methods to diversify skills for years, and I think this is great design. With skills, the more willing you are to click, the more XP you'll probably get. Releasing a mining method that was completely AFK and gave more XP than 3-tick granite, therefore, would not be a good thing, because then there would be no reason to do anything else. As skilling has taken a backseat to PvM in recent years, I assume we will continue to see more and more AFK training methods, as players will probably want to save their clicks for bosses. That is pretty much all I have for you today, so I will see you in the next one.